My fiancée stood up in the middle of dinner and said, "I don't think this is going to work anymore." Then she walked out like it meant nothing. I didn't chase her, just canceled one thing she thought was already secured. That same night, I found out where she had gone. 3 days later, there was a knock on my door, and the look on their faces told me something had gone very wrong. I'm 34 years old, and I haven't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in the past 72, and I'm sitting at the kitchen counter of an apartment that still has 2 wine glasses hanging on the rack above the sink because I haven't been able to make myself take the second one down. Not sentimentality, more like I'm preserving the evidence, keeping the scene intact until I've fully processed what happened in it. The knock came this morning. I knew it was coming. Not the specific morning, not the specific hour, but I'd known for 2 days that it was inevitable, the way you know a storm is coming. When the pressure drops and the birds go quiet and everything gets that particular charged stillness. I opened the door and I looked at their faces, and the faces told me everything I'd calculated had landed exactly where I'd aimed it. Let me start from the dinner, because the dinner is where the visible part of this story begins, even though the real story starts much earlier and in quieter rooms. We've been engaged for 14 months. The wedding was scheduled for late spring, venue booked, deposits paid, invitations in the design phase with a printer we'd put a partial payment down on. She'd been the one to drive most of the planning, which I'd been grateful for at the time and which I now understand was because she was the one with the most invested in its public dimensions. The wedding, for her, was an event. I'd made the mistake of thinking it was a marriage. The restaurant was her choice, the upscale Italian place near the theater district, the kind of room with white tablecloths and lighting calibrated to make everything look slightly more romantic than it is. Pendant lights over each table throwing warm circles of yellow light onto the cloth and leaving the edges of the room in a flattering shadow. We'd been there before, twice. Both good evenings. I remember thinking, when she suggested it that week, that it was a good sign. A nice dinner, mid-week, her initiative. I was looking for good signs because the previous 2 months had needed them. The previous 2 months. I'll get there. We ordered. Talked about ordinary things. Her work, my project timeline, a trip her sister was planning. She was pleasant, attentive, present in a way she hadn't been recently, and I felt myself relaxing into it the way you relax into warmth you've been missing. I asked her about the invitation design, and she said she'd been thinking about the timeline with the printer and we should probably talk about that. I said sure, whenever you're ready, and she nodded, and we ate, and the food was good, and for about 40 minutes I thought whatever had been off between us was correcting. Then she set down her fork, put her hands flat on the table, on either side of her plate, in a gesture so deliberate it was clearly practiced. Looked at me. "I don't think this is going to work anymore," she said. The restaurant continued. Someone at a table nearby was laughing at something. A waiter passed with a wine bottle and a towel. The pendant light over our table threw its warm circle, and the white tablecloth held it, and everything was exactly as it had been 3 seconds before, and also completely unrecognizable. "Okay," I said. My voice came out steady. I remember being surprised by that. I've been trying to find the right time to say this, and there isn't a right time. I just think. We've been heading in different directions, and I don't think getting married is going to fix that. When did you start thinking this? She looked at the table. A while. How long is a while? I don't know. A few months. A few months. The invitations. The venue deposit. The planning she'd continued to drive while thinking, for a few months, that it wasn't going to work. I filed that detail carefully. Is there something specific? I said, or is this? It's not one thing. It's just, I've been feeling like we want different things. Like I want a life that looks different than what we're building. What does the life you want look like? She hesitated. Something in the hesitation was information. I just need some space to figure that out, she said. I looked at her across the white tablecloth in the warm pendant light. 34 years old, 2 years of my life, 14 months of engagement, a spring wedding with deposits paid, and she was telling me she needed space to figure out what she wanted, using language so carefully generic that it contained no actual information, which is itself a kind of information. Okay, I said again. She waited, I think, for something else. For the pursuit, or the argument, or the breakdown, or the negotiation. Some response she'd scripted a counter to. That's it, she said. I don't know what else to say. You've told me you've been feeling this for a few months, and you need space. What would you like me to add? I thought you'd have more to say. I have quite a lot to say, but I think the more informative conversation would be the one you're not having with me right now, so I'm not going to perform the one you're waiting for. Her jaw tightened slightly. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. Stood up. I'm going to go, she said. Okay. She looked at me for a moment. Then she walked out of the restaurant, threading between the white-clothed tables, past the other couples and the waitstaff, through the door and into the street, without looking back once. I sat at the table. I finished my wine. I signaled the waiter and I ordered a small dessert I didn't want and I ate it methodically, because I was not going to leave a half-finished dinner in a restaurant tab that communicated distress to every person in that room. I paid the full check. I left a good tip. I walked out with my jacket on and my pace normal. In the car, I sat for a minute before starting the engine. My hands were completely still on the wheel, which struck me as physiologically strange given what my chest was doing. A kind of deep, slow clenching that had nothing to do with my heart rate and everything to do with what I already, in some prior knowledge part of my brain, suspected. A few months. Feeling like she wanted a different life. Language chosen for maximum. Vagueness. The restaurant chosen for the public nature of it. A location where my response would be automatically moderated by the presence of other people. The practiced quality of those flat hands on the tablecloth. This had been planned. Not spontaneous. Prepared. And the preparation was in service of something she didn't want to name. I drove home. I unlocked my apartment. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen counter, where I'm sitting now, and I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was the one thing she thought was already secured. The venue had been booked in my name. She'd suggested it. I'd made the calls and handled the contract, which was a financial commitment I'd fronted with the understanding we'd reconcile it later. The contract had a cancellation clause. I'd read it at signing because I read contracts. The window for a cancellation that recovered a portion of the deposit was, by the terms, within 60 days of a formal written notice. We were 43 days from that window closing. I wrote the cancellation notice at 11:47 that night, sitting alone in my kitchen with the second wine glass hanging above me on the rack. I sent it by email and followed it immediately with a certified mail request through an online service. Formal, documented, time-stamped. By morning, it was in process. Then the printer deposit, smaller but in my name, canceled. Then I looked at the joint planning folder we built in the cloud, the shared document with all the vendor contacts and the timeline, and the seating chart in progress and the notes on the catering tasting. I didn't delete it. I exported every document in it to my personal drive. Then I removed her access. Quietly, without notification. The documents sat there in her cloud folder and appeared, from her side, exactly as they'd been. What changed was that her access to the shared version, the live version, the one with my annotations and vendor correspondence, was severed. She would still see a folder. It just wouldn't update anymore. I did all of this by 2 in the morning. Then I did the thing that told me everything I didn't have confirmed. I had her location on a shared app. The same kind of arrangement that's presented as mutual but drifts, over time, into something one-sided. I checked it occasionally when she was late and I was trying to calibrate dinner timing. She checked it, based on what I could observe, rarely. It was still on. She hadn't thought to turn it off. I opened it, looked at where she'd been since leaving the restaurant. She had not gone to her sister's, had not gone to a friend's apartment on the east side, the one she usually went to when she needed to decompress. Had not gone anywhere I'd have expected. She was at a hotel, a mid-range place near the business district, the kind of hotel that's not a statement but is an arrangement, functional, private, not the kind of place you go alone to think. I looked at the pin on the map for a long moment. Then I closed the app. Then I reopened it and screenshot the location, timestamped. Then I closed it again and set my phone face down on the counter. I thought about the previous 2 months, which I'd been circling without naming. I thought about a specific evening 6 weeks prior when she'd come home from a work event with a particular bright, slightly over-explained energy that I'd noticed and set aside. I thought about a name I'd heard twice in her work conversations, a colleague she mentioned with just enough frequency to establish normalcy, like someone rehearsing a minor character into the background so they don't become notable. I thought about a Saturday 3 weeks ago when she'd gone to look at fabric samples for the wedding with a lead time that was 40 minutes longer than the fabric. Sample place was from our apartment, in a direction that was not between our apartment and that place. The geometry had always been slightly off. I just hadn't assembled it into a shape until now. I did not go to the hotel. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I went to bed at 2:30 and I lay in the dark and I breathed. And in the morning I got up and made coffee and I called my brother because he is the person I call when I need to think out loud with someone who will not react before thinking. "Walk me through what you know," he said. I walked him through it. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to know the full picture before I do anything else." "That's smart," he said. "Don't move fast. Move right." I spent day 2 gathering, not in a dramatic surveillance way, in the way that becomes available to you when you're calm and paying attention and the person who is managing what. You saw us stop managing it because they think the relationship is already over and the management is no longer necessary. The colleague's name appeared in a context that made the geometry suddenly precise. A mutual acquaintance, someone we'd both known for years, who ran in our overlapping professional circles, sent me a message that afternoon. Awkward, clearly uncomfortable, the digital equivalent of someone shifting their weight from foot to foot. She'd apparently seen my fiancé and a colleague at a restaurant the previous evening, the evening after the dinner where I'd been told it wasn't going to work, and had been unsure whether to say anything, and had ultimately decided I should know because she would want to know. The restaurant they'd been at was 2 blocks from the hotel. I sat with that geography for a while. Then I responded to my acquaintance with genuine warmth and thanked her, and told her I was handling it, and that she'd done the right thing. I meant all of it. Here is what I did not do on day 2. I did not call my fiancé, did not text, did not reach out in any form. My phone had received 2 texts from her. One the previous night that said "I hope you're okay" in the particular language of someone who wants acknowledgement that the damage is manageable, and one that morning that said "Can we talk soon?" in the language of someone who has realized the silence is not performing the function they anticipated. I read both. I did not respond to either. What I did instead was make an appointment. Same day, there was an opening with the attorney I consulted once years ago on an unrelated business matter. I brought the cancellation confirmation from the venue, the documentation of the deposits I'd fronted, and a clear timeline of the engagement period. I was there for 90 minutes. I left with a very clear understanding of my position. Day 3, the knock. I'd been up since 6. I was dressed, coffee made, sitting at the kitchen counter when I heard them on the stairs. Not one person, 2 sets of footsteps, which told me something before the knock. She hadn't come alone. I opened the door. She was there, with her mother beside her. Her mother, who had been, throughout the 14 months of our engagement, unfailingly warm to me, who had hugged me at family gatherings and referred to me as practically family, and who now was standing in my doorway with an expression that I can only describe as the look of someone who has arrived expecting to manage a situation and has already begun to suspect the situation is not manageable in the way they planned. My fiancé's face was different from anything I'd seen in 2 years. Not the careful pleasantness of the dinner. Not the managed neutrality of recent weeks. Something stripped. Her eyes were slightly swollen in a way that wasn't recent. She'd been crying, and it hadn't been that morning. "We need to talk," she said. "Okay," I said. "Come in." They came in. I did not offer tea. I sat at the kitchen counter. They sat at the small table by the window. The second wine glass was still on the rack above the sink. "I've been trying to reach you," she said. "I know. You didn't respond. I needed some time to think. I think you said the same to me 2 nights ago." Her mother's eyes moved between us. "Taking the temperature. I talked to the venue," my fiancé said. "They told me the booking had been canceled." "Yes. You canceled our wedding venue. I canceled a venue booked in my name, on a contract I was party to, within the cancellation window specified in the contract. Without talking to me, you told me it wasn't going to work. I took you seriously and handled the financial commitment accordingly. I didn't mean," she stopped. Her mother put a hand on her arm, briefly, then removed it. "I was in a bad place that night. I was scared. I didn't mean I wanted to cancel everything." I looked at her for a moment. Thought about the hotel 2 blocks from the restaurant. Thought about the colleague. Thought about a few months of feeling like she wanted a different life. "When you left the restaurant," I said, carefully, "where did you go?" The silence lasted approximately 6 seconds. "To a friend's," she said. "Which friend?" Another silence. Her mother looked at the table. "That's not," my fiancé started. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd like you to think carefully about your answer, because I already know where you were and I'm asking you to decide. right now in this kitchen, whether this conversation is going to be honest or whether it's going to be another managed version. I kept my voice completely level. Where did you go? The thing that happened to her face in the following moment is not something I can fully describe. It was the specific collapse of a structure that had been maintained under significant effort for a significant period of time. The management dropped. What was underneath it was just a person who had been running two things in parallel and had arrived at the point where the parallel lines were converging and there was nothing left to do but stand at the intersection. She told me, not everything, not in that kitchen with her mother present, but enough. The colleague, 3 months. The dinner had been, she said, her attempt to create space to figure out what she wanted, which was, translated from its managed language, her attempt to suspend our engagement without formally ending it while she determined whether what she had with him was real enough to leave for. I sat with that. 48 hours of calculation, confirmed. Her mother, to her credit, said very little. She was there as support, not as advocate, and she was reading the room with the accuracy of someone who understood that the situation was not what she'd been told it was on the drive over. I want to fix this, my fiancé said. I know how this looks. I know I handled it wrong, but I want to fix it. I thought about fix, about what fix would mean, about a spring wedding with no venue, about the printer deposit, about 14 months of planning for something she'd been conducting a 3-month parallel evaluation of, about a hotel 2 blocks from the restaurant the night after she'd told me it wasn't going to work. I believe that you believe that right now, I said, but I think what you want to fix is the discomfort of the consequences, and I'm not able to help with that. She cried. Her mother moved closer to her. The kitchen held all of it, the second wine glass on the rack, the light coming through the window at the angle that meant it was almost noon, the coffee cup in front of me that had gone cold. I told her what I needed her to know, that I wished her well, that I didn't intend to make the end of this uglier than it needed to be, and that I would be in touch through the attorney about the financial matters that needed resolving. I said all of it with a care and a quietness that I think surprised her, because what she'd expected, what the mother's presence had been recruited to help manage, was rage or breakdown or negotiation. She'd prepared for a fire, and I was offering her a closed door. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a while. Then I took the second wine glass off the rack, and I washed it and dried it, and put it in the cabinet with the others. The colleague, as of the last information I have, did not become the thing she'd been deciding about. These parallel situations rarely survive the daylight. What they are in the dark, sustained by the specific energy of being a secret, tends to reveal itself as structurally insufficient once it's required to exist without that energy. I know this from the mutual acquaintance, who has kept me loosely informed in the way people do when they feel they owe you something. She reached out once more 3 weeks later. A long message, late at night, the kind of message people write when they've been sitting with something and can no longer contain it. I read it once and did not respond. Not out of cruelty, out of the understanding that there was nothing in it that required me. I'm still in the same apartment. The venue refunded a portion of the deposit, as the contract stipulated. The financial matters resolved, through the attorney, without significant conflict. She was not in a position, legally or morally, to contest much, and she knew it. The kitchen counter is where I do my thinking now. Early mornings, late nights, the particular quality of quiet that comes with living alone in a space that used to hold more noise. I've gotten used to it. Not comfortable, exactly. Accurate. It feels accurate. Edit. People are asking about the mother, why she came, whose idea it was. My read is that my fiancé told her family a version of events that was incomplete, the way people do when they need support, but aren't ready to be honest about what they need support for. The mother came because she was worried about her daughter and hoped to facilitate a resolution. I don't hold anything against her. She figured out the shape of the real situation fairly quickly in that kitchen and adjusted accordingly. She sent me a brief message 2 weeks later, just a few sentences, saying she was sorry for how things had gone. I responded with equal brevity and equal sincerity. Some people, when the situation clarifies, show you who they actually are. She did. Edit 2. The question I keep getting is whether I would have handled it differently if I hadn't known about the hotel that night. Honest answer, the cancellations and the attorney. Yes, those were things I would have done regardless, because she told me clearly it wasn't going to work and I had financial exposure I needed to protect. The The conversation in the kitchen might have been different. I might have asked more questions. But I think the essential shape of it would have been the same, because the thing that ended us wasn't what I found out. It was what she said at the restaurant, the way she said it, and the walkout that came after. That was the ending. Everything else was just documentation.